Propaganda was consistently used during the Cold War. Cold War propaganda promoted the advantages and virtues of one political system and criticized the other. This reached its peak in the 1950s and 1960s, a time when pro American values were promoted in film, television, music, literature, and art. A new Red Scare broke out after World War II. The main tool used to create anti-Soviet hysteria was propaganda. The communists were seen everywhere. This mass hysteria successfully affected American society and culture. The political hostility between the United States and the Soviet Union in the 1950's not only included enemy propaganda in both countries, but was also a power battle between both nations to sell their different ideologies to the world. One example of early propaganda is the 1951 Children's Crusade against communism. Bubblegum cards is a great example of how propaganda was used with a younger audience. The cards came with bubblegum and used cartoon depictions with bright colors. As the time passed, the themes and methods in pro-Western propaganda became subtle. Governments produced less of it themselves, instead relying on film and television studios to incorporate acceptable ideas and values into their product. Communism was condemned both as a political ideology and a social and economic system. Every medium, from motion pictures down to children's comic books, was used to portray America under the threat of falling to a communist takeover. In the comic book The Godless Communism, an American family wakes up to find the United States was taken over by the communists virtually overnight and renamed the United Soviet States of America. As they look for help, they find all their rights and freedoms have been abolished, the father is relocated to a distant lumber mill, the mother to an urban factory, and the children to state-run schools. Movies brought the battle between democracy and communism to the big screen. Many pro-American films were made in the wake of the communist blacklist, as movie studios and producers strived to appear patriotic and loyal. Cold War hysteria seeped into the science fiction genre in movies such as The Red Planet Mars, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and The Blob. All contained aliens who took the form of shadowy forces that took control of the world by stealth and obvious metaphors for communist infiltration. Cold War movie posters were propaganda pieces of their own, using bold fonts and colors and characters that recall imagery found in communist posters. These are important tools in countering the communism. Television was still new in the 1950's. Most television programs contained music, light entertainment, and comedy, so anti-communist themes were represented more subtly. American television in the 1950's promoted conservative family values and the virtues of American society, particularly in the situational comedies like Leave It to Beaver and The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet emphasized the importance of education, work, obedience, respect for your parents, and the stability and prosperity enjoyed by American families. Television was born during the Cold War's early period, and since the medium was slowly growing networks would primarily find sponsorship and financing from the state, more specifically the Defense Department. As a result, American television content focused on the West's position about the Soviet Union, and thus the medium started being used quite extensively as a propaganda tool. America led one of the most successful propaganda campaigns in history, due primarily to the effectiveness of print media, which in this segment includes newspapers, posters, and books. The spy novel genre was by far the most prevalent in Cold War literature. Ian Fleming's novel about a British spy, James Bond, were written in the 1950's and were motivated by tensions with the Soviet bloc and the spy who loved me. Bond battled a Soviet counter-espionage agency. John le Carre penned a number of novels, such as The Spy Who Came In from the Cold War set in East Germany. Cold War tensions fueled competition and shaped the content of art forms as diverse as music and ballet. American and Soviet dance companies performed regularly around the world, attempting to demonstrate cultural superiority. This competition led to a dramatic rise in the U.S. government's funding for the arts. The U.S. provided funds to allow several orchestras, jazz bands, and solo musicians to tour the USSR in an attempt to demonstrate the artistic advantages of capitalism. The superpowers also engaged in chess competitions to prove whose strategies were more efficient. Cold War tensions and rivalries were often played out in the sporting arena. As with technology and space exploration, sports were an area where rival powers could prove their dominance without going to war. As a consequence, sports in the Cold War was often political, yet it could also be productive. Sports served as an icebreaker. Interest in sports proved common ground as an opportunity for political rivals to communicate and forge better relations. Education systems in both the US and the USSR received dramatic boost in funding, particularly in the maths and sciences. Humanities subjects like history and English focused on patriotism and political values. In 1952, for example, the American Pledge of Allegiance, widely chanted by schoolchildren, was altered to include the words "under God." Many American students were also subject to social hygiene or mental health films in high school. These short movies focused on personal development like hygiene, manners, respect for others, and appropriate behavior. They contained obvious political messages, such as one called How to Spot a Communist. Children in American schools were also taught the famous duck and cover drills, training in what they should do in the event of a Soviet nuclear attack. The United States and its allies tried to persuade democratic people that they lived in the best society on earth. This belief that they lived in a free and democratic society created unity. Propaganda was successful. It created a shared culture that persisted throughout the ideological war. It also helped keep the Cold War from becoming a hot one. Lastly, propaganda influenced society into a common belief that the enemy was wrong.